Hello and welcome to another episode of Medtech Adventures. I'm your host, Scott Phillips, also the CEO of StarFish Medical. And this is a show where we interview legendary founders and builders of the medtech industry. And today I'm very pleased to present Ramgopal Rao, Ram Rao, who's been in the industry for decades and has specialized in the ophthalmic sector. And it's a real privilege to have you on the show here today, Ram.
Thank you, Scott. Nice to be here.
Great. Wonderful. Okay, so I think your story is fascinating because you're born in India, but made your career in the US in a variety of companies. And so it's going to be fun to sort of walk through the journey and find the themes and lessons learned. And so here you are in your late 70s. In fact, I believe you just turned 80 and still going at it hard in your most ambitious venture yet. And we'll get to that later. So let's talk about your childhood in India. This is the time of partition, the late 40s. It's a very difficult time in Indian history.
It was a very difficult time in Indian history, and also the province, which was a small kingdom under the British, where I lived, in the big city, and was also interesting things were happening there as well at that time.
This is in Hyderabad, I believe.
In Hyderabad. Yeah. Hyderabad was ruled by a Muslim king, and for their dynasty was about 300 years old. They were viceroys of the Mughal Empire, and then they declared at some point independence and created a kingdom. But it was such an interesting, it was not like a provincial little kingdom. You know, they had their own coinage, currency, railway, post office system, and a university system and education.
Yes.
That separated. And they wanted to make it in image of the Muslim. And so although population was only about 30% Muslim in the state, or maybe less. And so it was an interesting times at that time. There was a lot of harmony at that time, which doesn't seem to be there anymore now.
Right, yes.
Politics, essentially. But I grew up in a family, middle-class family, typical middle-class family. My father was a bureaucrat, and we were 5 brothers. And if you were not top of the class at any time, it was elementary school or high school, then you were nobody in the family.
Yes.
So that was always very, very challenging. But it sort of came automatically to us. We assumed we will always graduate at the top of the class, etc. And so my older brothers went on to become engineers, doctors, very successful. And my father thought I should become an administrator.
Oh, yes.
And kind of like run a big province or something like that for government. And I had no interest in it. So in my 8th grade, I decided I'm going to be a very good engineer.
Right.
And most likely something interesting like computers, electronics. Computers were just not there at the time, but electronics was the... And
transistor was just in its early days.
Transistors and early... I don't think I saw television until I was 13, 14 years old, I think.
Oh, right.
Yeah, and so I decided, and I had to make that decision in 9th grade anyway, that which track you're going to go.
Yes.
They separated kids at that time. You're going to go to biology, engineering, math, or accounting, or something like that. And your high school years were determined what you learned by which track you were on.
Sure, yeah.
So I decided I'm going to go on the engineering. I didn't tell my father. And because he wanted me to take more liberal arts and administration kind of things.
Yeah.
And so when I graduated, and I did graduate at the top of the class and got into one of the best elite engineering schools.
Yeah.
But in my second year in that engineering store, I decided I'm going to go to the United States for study.
That's a pretty
graduate study.
Strange decision to make at that time.
Yeah, very early.
Was that normal in India at the time?
No, it wasn't.
Right.
And it was, people didn't even think about what they're going to do until just about the last year.
Right.
Just before graduation. But I decided I'm not going to be working in India at any company
Yeah.
or government,
Right.
and I'm going to go abroad
Yes.
for education. And the United States was my favorite place.
Yeah.
And I sort of felt I knew the culture in the United States through the books, Hollywood movies, and everything else. I read a lot of books
Yeah.
about the U.S. And so I kind of felt I know the place. When I get there, I'll fit in.
Yeah.
And so I started writing to universities all
Right.
over the place
Mm-hmm.
that I will be graduating 2-3 years from now, and I want to get into graduate school.
Right.
And most people thought, why are you writing so early?
Yes.
And they said, I want to make sure
Yeah.
I have a place when I graduate.
Yes.
And so I did get admissions in several places. Most of them were Midwestern colleges, the land grant colleges. They love
Yeah.
foreign students.
Yeah.
And but I also got into some good schools.
Yeah.
And then I started, as I came closer to graduation and traveling to US, I started writing to them. This was all written by mail at that time,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
And I was writing to them and say that I need to get assistance,
Yeah.
financial assistance. So I don't have any other means to support myself.
Yeah.
And everybody said, yeah, we do give out some graduate assistance programs, but that's only after we observe you for one semester here,
Yes.
and if you fit and you are right kind of a candidate.
Yeah.
And so there was a lot of back and forth dialogue going with them, and
Yeah.
I was insisting they should give me before I go,
Yeah.
otherwise I can't even go.
Oh, yeah, that was tricky. That's an entrepreneurial problem, maybe
Yeah.
in some respect.
Exactly, right?
Yeah.
This is you're basically selling a value proposition here.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
And finally, I did get one Midwestern college gave me assistantship without seeing me on the campus.
Yes.
And that enabled me to get my visas and all
sure.
that. My father didn't want me to go, and he was
Right.
afraid if I go, I'll never come back. And he
Which is true.
Which is true. He kind of knew my agenda. And
Yes.
so he wanted to block me, not seriously, but he wanted to block me by saying, hey, you don't have any funds to travel,
Right.
and also support yourself for the first month or two.
Yeah.
And I don't think I'm going to provide those funds for you.
Yes.
And I knew he would give me
Yeah.
in the last minute, but I think he was challenging me in a way too.
Yes.
So I started applying for travel grants
Travel
from the
grants.
foundations.
Oh, okay.
And so one of the foundations said, if we give travel grants based on merit.
Yeah.
And so I submitted my credentials, and I ended up getting the travel grant.
Amazing. There you go.
And so I really didn't need
Mm-hmm.
a lot of support from my father. And I was here, and I did 1 year graduation program, and then I went in Midwest, and then from there I went to Boston,
You're right.
and then I also joined MIT.
Right. So you went to MIT. You bridged across partway
Yeah.
through your graduate program to MIT.
No, after graduating,
After
I
you
went
you
for
got a
the
master's
PhD
degree.
program.
Went
Yeah,
for a PhD program.
yeah, at MIT.
Okay, great.
Yeah. And so then I was also employed at the time
Sure.
with a company, and so that was interesting experience.
Yeah, sure.
And I settled in Boston, and I got married. I met
Yeah.
Sandhya, my wife there, and she was a student too.
Right.
And when we got married, we were very, very young.
Yes.
And I was something like 23, 24, and she was 19,
Right.
still in college.
Yes.
But we made a life together. It
Yes.
was excellent life now.
Amazing.
Yeah,
Going on 60 years.
going on almost 60 years of marriage.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
so it's been very fulfilling for me in many ways.
Mm-hmm.
What I liked about the culture is it's a true meritocracy,
Yes.
and the talent and the hard work gets recognized
Yeah.
properly
Mm-hmm.
most of the time,
Yeah.
and the rewards follow too.
Sure.
And so that was good.
So maybe touching on that before we get into the entrepreneurial stories. So your belief about the U.S. based on your Indian reading was
Right.
that this was a meritocracy. Somehow attracted you, this idea that you
Yes, yes.
could achieve based on your what you kind of deserved, what you earned.
That's right. And there were no surprises
Yeah.
too, in terms of what I expected in U.S. and what type of people I will encounter.
Yeah.
Very open-minded people,
Yeah.
and they didn't have any cultural biases or anything
Yeah,
like
sure.
that, or at least in big cities.
Yeah.
And it was very welcoming kind of a society.
Yeah.
When I found out that people recognize other people with the same values,
Right.
and that was very refreshing for me. Yeah.
Nice. Great. So let's jump forward. So you've had your experience at MIT, and now it's time to go out into the working world. And so, what was your thought about your career at the time? Do you think you were going to start a company or go find a good?
No, at that time, all I was thinking was, I want to be the best engineer there is,
Right.
and in whatever I did.
Yeah.
And so first, my job was in mainframe computers, designing them.
Really?
Yeah, the central processors,
This
communications.
is like
unit.
Digital Equipment Corp. And
No, this was with Honeywell.
Honeywell.
Honeywell
Okay.
had a big division. They were number 2
Yeah.
in mainframes after
Yeah.
IBM at that time.
Yeah. Sure.
Weak number 2, but they were number 2.
Yeah.
And so I was in their R&D group, and they gave me really challenging tasks, although I was fresh engineer, and they put me in charge of a big project. And we did it very successfully.
Yeah.
But then the company started making decisions which, to me, at my level in that company, didn't make sense.
Right.
And nobody can explain to me where these decisions are being made,
Yeah.
probably 7 layers above me. But what's the rationale? I couldn't find it, and that frustrated me.
This is a common theme I find in these interviews.
Yeah.
Is people working in corporate setting getting frustrated by decisions that don't seem right to them,
Yeah.
and then being
They're
frustrated.
probably right,
Yes.
but they were not being communicated
Right.
properly.
Sure. Yes.
And the rationale was, I don't know whether there or not.
Yeah.
And so I started looking
Yeah.
to join a very small company. So I joined a startup.
Okay.
I had nothing to do with the founding of that company, but it's just a startup, bunch of scientists, engineers in different disciplines,
Yeah.
optics and mechanics and interferometry and digital electronics, analog electronics.
So this is an instrument company.
This is an instrument
And
company.
what is it measuring?
They were building the first, what they call Fourier transform analytical spectroscopy.
Okay.
So most of this spectroscopy before that was based on gratings.
Right. Sure.
Gratings basically separated the frequencies. And interferometry basically created in time domain,
Yeah.
an interferogram. And if you do a Fourier transform, apply to that, and then you get the frequency distribution.
Yes.
And so that concept was known from Michelson's days.
Yes.
And but there was no digital technology to do the transforms.
Right.
So most of the transforms were done in analog,
Right.
and that took days to do it,
Right.
to get one spectrum of one compound. So we realized that you can speed it up, and just around that time, there was an algorithm came, very famous algorithm in those days called Cooley-Tukey algorithm,
Okay.
which is called DFT, digital Fourier transform, and it sped up like orders of magnitude.
Right.
But you had to do it in a digital domain. And so we had to take the analog signals from the interferometers, digitize them with a very high resolution, and then do very high resolution transforms.
Yes.
And it was all done in software. And we were limited by, of course, computers at that
Tiny
time.
little computers with little teeny memories and so on.
Yeah, they were the core memories.
Yes.
Our first computer we built the machine on was a core memory.
Right.
And we had to, the biggest challenge for the software designers was, you only have 8K or 16K bytes of memory. You had to put your program, your data, and everything else in that one, controlling the instrument, everything in there. And it was really, really challenging.
This is early 70s kind of.
It's, yes, early 70s.
Yeah.
And so, but the team was very determined, very bright team in general, and we got it done.
Yeah.
And we pioneered the whole technology there.
Sure.
And large companies, DuPont, Dow Chemicals, Union Carbide, they were all very, very interested in it.
Yeah.
And even because applications were in any industry that uses organic compounds.
Right.
And so cosmetics and food industry, everywhere there was an application. And so we brought the machine and we created a marketing team, and that's where I learned quite a bit about marketing.
Okay, so you had a technical role in that project, and then did it sort of migrate, or you became interested in product management or marketing?
So I started as the digital part of the entire technology engineer, building the hardware, software, and all that. And then, but gradually, I think maybe my aptitude towards managing complex projects or whatever it is, I ended up as the head of the R&D.
Right.
And so there were optical engineers, and there were a lot of things that I had no idea of.
Right.
Anything.
Right, sure.
The mechanical parts, how to design interferometers, signal processing, and all that. But it was good learning very quickly, and very bright people and very helpful people there.
Yeah.
And I ran the project, and then at one point I even started running the operations, manufacturing of.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
So this young hotshot is migrating up through the company.
Yeah, and it was good. I think I was probably not as bright as all these people around me, but probably I was the best synthesizer.
Right.
And that's the most important element in a company like this, because there were a lot of disparate people with very strong opinions and ideas, but somebody has to bring them all together and point out in the right direction. I think I probably did that better than other people, or at least my management, my CEO thought that.
That's fun. Keep giving you more responsibility.
Exactly, yeah, and I enjoyed it, and plus I was very industrious too, because getting something done had a huge value for me.
Yeah, sure.
And I knew it entailed a lot of sacrifices in terms of your family time, that and this, and but I knew that comes with the territory, and so those were really enjoyable years, mostly in terms of discovery, engineering, and such a different fields we were working on, synthesizing all this technology into one product. That was really, really fun project. It's kind of like what you do also. You do the same thing in StarFish, bring a lot of different technology and synthesizing them into.
I enjoy that. I'm a synthesizer too. I don't know if I have any other skills, but I'm good at that.
And it's really enjoyable. But the general problem with the entire team was we're not very good at marketing.
Yes.
Neither did we really have an aptitude for it.
Right.
Selling was something we consider as a lowly task.
Right.
Somebody else would do it for you, and which was such a wrong concept. And then we were not also good in finance.
Right.
We didn't know how to raise money, how to manage the money.
Yeah.
We got involved in a lot of interesting pioneering projects.
Yeah.
Which some of them sort of spun off from our main technology. And for example, one that made a humongous amount of money for the company was we took the same interferometer idea and to measure the thickness of silicon wafers.
Right.
And there was only destructive technology before to measure them. And we said, okay, we can send a infrared beam through the beam, collect the return beam,
Yeah.
and to do the Fourier transform. And if you use it with a laser as the unit of measure, then we can easily measure how thick it is.
Right.
And we developed that in something like 10 weeks. That instrument,
Wow.
complete.
Amazing.
And we took it to Intel, and they said, this is amazing. And how much? And we didn't know anything. We said, okay, it'll cost us $30,000, so 60.
Right.
And later on, I learned that they would have paid $500,000 for it.
Yes. So you're getting involved in product definition, early
Yeah.
market work as well. So it sounds
Yeah,
like.
that's right.
So this is really interesting. So tell me what happened when you took these complex instruments to market. What did you learn?
Then we sort of internally analyze on what kind of a salespeople can sell this as a complex instrument. It performs 1,000 times better than any instrument they have in their labs right now, and its detection power is also about 1,000 times better, and so it can see things which none of their instruments see now.
Yeah.
And in terms of finding the contaminations and other things in the manufacturing process. And so we hired 5 academic professors.
Yeah.
And we thought they're the only ones who can explain to the customers, our customers, what this can do. By accident, we also hired a guy from Perkin-Elmer. He used to sell these older technology.
Yeah.
And so he had kind of he knew the people relationship.
Yeah.
We hired him too. And we were very concerned that how he's going to explain this machine, because we brought him to train, and we found that he's almost not trainable.
Right. Couldn't even speak the language or so on.
Yeah, I mean, he said, and he looked like, I'm not interested
Yes.
how it works. And he just tell me what it does for my customer.
Yes.
That kind of a thing.
Uh-huh.
And we didn't see any wisdom in that at that time. And when we basically deployed all these 6 people, and we found out a year later that any sales that were made that year all came from this college dropout salesman. And the 5 salesmen did get many sales, and when they did get a sale, it was something we were about to make next year.
Oh, I see. You were selling stuff you didn't even have.
Yeah, but we talked about, we can do this, we can do this, and they were already selling those things.
Oh, yes.
And so even when a purchase order came for a few $100,000 from DuPont or something like that, so there were so many caveats in that one.
Yes.
You have to deliver this to get this amount of money, you have to deliver this,
Yeah.
which all is going to happen next year, following year. So I started traveling with salespeople to see. I was bewildered by this phenomenon.
Yeah.
Totally, something we didn't expect.
Yeah.
And then it sort of dawned on me what is the true sales process is.
Mm-hmm.
This sales guy who was successful, he went there and said, what problems you got in your lab here or in your factory? And give me your problem. I'll take it back to Cambridge, where we were,
Yeah.
Massachusetts, and we have application scientists there. We solved that problem, bring back, and if I bring back with a decent solution, how many machines would you buy?
Right.
That's it. That was the only thing he said.
Right.
And then he brought back, and he worked with the application scientists for days, weekends,
Yeah.
until he got the solution, and then he got the orders.
Right.
As simple as that. You solve a customer's problem.
Yes, yes. And the customer knows that he doesn't know the technology,
Yeah.
and he doesn't need to know the technology.
Yeah, and he I mean, they were all PhDs, scientists that he was selling to, but a lot of these people were putting their career, going up the management chain and say, hey, we usually used to spend $20,000-$30,000 for a conventional spectrometer, but now we have this thing which costs a few $100,000.
Yeah.
And so in order to get the budget approved, it took a long time. It was a long budget. So, but he accelerated by, okay, here is the problem we solved. the management signed right away.
Yeah, sure. Made it easier. Understood that whole buying cycle.
He understood.
So this is interesting. So you'd gone from being a very technical person to with your synthesis ability, taking on more sort of management responsibility, now migrating over to product management, sales kind of thinking.
That's
so
right.
this is very, very interesting.
Yeah.
Let's talk about your first decision to start a company.
So that company I'm talking about, I stayed with for a long time, and eventually we were put out of misery by a big company, Biorad, coming in and acquiring us. And I ended up running an ophthalmology division for Biorad.
Oh, okay.
And diagnostic instrument. And that was an autonomous division, completely with self-contained in some. We had our own manufacturing, R&D, sales, marketing, everything.
And did you have P&L and all?
We had a total P&L responsibility.
Yeah, sure.
And which was great, and because that was first kind of okay, I'm running the entire business myself, kind of an experience. We did well with that. We acquired technologies, products, and when we acquired technology from universities, we built products around them, and we acquired products from other companies, and we grew the sales, and we took the company, which was simply a private label manufacturer for Alcon instruments, and to multi-instruments and all that, different technologies. That sort of, I decided at that point, I need to do this myself, something. And so I worked with a Japanese company, and they said, we are looking somebody to market our products in the US. Right now we sell through distributors.
So you're starting to look for a company you can start.
Yeah, they actually came to me and they said, would you run our division in US?
Yeah.
And I said, no, I'm not interested in that, but we could start a joint venture because I have ideas for starting new products.
Yeah.
And so that's how we made it.
I always wondered how that, this became the beginning of Tomei.
Yeah, that's how it became a beginning of Tomei. We created a brand name.
Yeah.
The company was called Toyo Medical, and I said, that's not a good name for a U.S. company, so we kind of took Tomei, the two words, and they liked it a lot.
Yeah, sure.
Created new logo and a new way of marketing, and so what we did, and there was a product we were wanted to develop, which is in corneal topography, and then they had some autorefractors, like mundane products.
Yeah.
And they had an ambition to develop more products in their R&D, but they felt that their R&D was running in vacuum without any inputs from outside world and what products to develop.
Yeah.
So we develop a lot of products, but they don't see the daylight much because they were wrong products for the wrong market.
Interesting. So you're potentially a fix for that classically Japanese problem of sort of insular R&D. Right.
There are a lot of engineers, big 40 engineers, 50 engineers there. And so I used to make a regular trip, sit down with all the engineers, all the products they're talking about, and how to tweak the products, how to bring the market sort of a thinking into the product, what market is looking for, and sort of define the products that way. Sure. And not let them develop products which have not much of a market.
Sure. So I'm fascinated. So the thing you're probably most famous for is the sort of the father of the corneal topography, at least that's but I assume at the time it was not an obvious product. There was no such thing.
No, it wasn't. So if you wanted to know the curvature of cornea,
and why did you want to know that? It's just for contact lenses?
To know the astigmatism of the eye,
of
the cornea, basically. And it was an important thing to know for fitting contact lenses at that time. And at that time also, RK was becoming popular in the US and worldwide.
Radial keratotomy.
Radial keratotomy, which you make corneal incisions, radial incisions in cornea to make the cornea flat, to correct the...
Sort of a precursor to LASIK.
Yeah, precursor to LASIK. And that was becoming the technology which was invented in Japan and Russia,
Yes.
and the U.S. adapted much later, but it was private pay, so there was a lot of attraction
Right.
for people to do it, and demand was very high. People wanted to get rid of their glasses for myopia, and so it was just a perfect storm kind of a thing. And so this instrument became an important instrument for that market, because if a patient had a keratoconus, which is some kind of a irregular cornea, and then he's not a suitable candidate for RK.
Right.
So it's basically to filter the patients and pick the right patients, because liability would be very high in a private pay situation.
Sure.
So we understood that in a marketing sense.
Right.
So instead of selling it to universities and other researchers mostly, which first wave, that's what we did.
Yeah.
They were all interested in publishing papers and understanding and helping cornea, contact lens fitting on the cornea and all that. So we said, its real application is here. Every clinician who wants to do RK would want to.
Okay, so now this is the placido rings that the patient's looking into sort of a dome with a series of black and white circles on it that are reflected off of the cornea.
That's right.
And so was that original to you, or that presumably there was a placido person somewhere who...
Placido concept came from a fellow called Placido, Italian gentleman, and he built the first placido to look at patients and to understand, but just by looking at it and the distortion of the rings, he kind of understood what the astigmatism was.
Right, sure.
And so what it was needed was to grab an image of that and put it through the math,
right.
and then make a map. Exact map.
That astigmatism must just look like an oval, more or less.
Exactly.
At some rotational angle, and voila.
That's
how
right.
oval it is and what angle
That's
is
right.
the two things you need to know.
And if you have a local deformity, like a keratoconus, like a bump on the cornea, in curvature, you would see as a, if we take the, what they call them, isobars, and they look like isobars, but they're all bunched up together.
Yeah, sure.
And so we needed to basically build a map, and then we are presenting it as a color map. And the color map, surgeons loved it, clinicians loved it, because once they saw it, they knew exactly what how the cornea looked in reality. And although this was, what we were printing on that was instantaneous curvatures at that point. But that gave an idea. And so that, we understood how to market this product, and out of the two motivations, greed and fear, fear was the stronger element here.
Yes.
Why they were buying, because they don't want to be sued by the patients for doing an RK on a wrong patient. And we conveyed that message very subtly but right way. And so we created this brand name, and we cultivated the KOLs, and we went worldwide with the technology through distributors and a subsidiary in Europe. And there was a consistent brand name, consistent message, and we were very successful. And everybody thought we were a much larger company, that we created that image.
Aura. This is fascinating. So you kind of learned your trade, as it were, of projecting the company through your Biorad or Digilab days, and then they sort of applied that into this new company.
That's right.
Now, was this all funded by Toyo, or did you need to go
we
find
were
separate
generating
capital?
our own funding by this time. They gave us the original startup capital, so to speak, and to develop the instrument and go to market with it. And but then we were generating most of the cash ourselves.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So I think there was one other company, Joe Wakil's company, was sort of your arch competitor that's developing.
That's right. We were the only two companies at that time. And we were kind of like 60%, maybe 55%, maybe they're 45% or something like that, all the time competing. And that company had a lot of KOLs as a shareholders.
Oh, okay.
And since we are a joint venture company, the Japanese, there was no structure
Right.
to give shareholders.
Yes.
And so we couldn't. So we had to basically depend upon our talent
Right.
and how well we did our R&D and marketing.
Mhm.
We did better
Yes.
always than them.
Yes.
And Joe, because he's an ophthalmologist, and he had a little entree into a lot of places.
Yes.
But we countered that too easily, no problem at all.
Because your technology was better?
Our technology was better, our communication of our technology, why it is better, was good.
Yeah.
And we had good people talking about it.
Mm-hmm.
And so overall,
Mm-hmm.
Joe's company looked like a little bit like a used car salesman,
Oh, yes.
and where we look like, we speaking from authority of the science.
Oh, I see. Fascinating.
Yeah.
Very interesting. So that was a good success, and that ran for a few years. Or it's still around. It's maybe 30.
It's still around.
Mhm.
At one point, a lot of companies started competing with us,
Yeah.
and including Humphrey. Humphrey was one of the biggest instrument companies
Yeah.
there, very aggressive, and they just got acquired by Zeiss.
Right.
And so we knew everybody will come after us. And independent of how good our intellectual property portfolio was, in that world, people will infringe, violate, take chances anyway,
Yeah.
with the hope that they can settle in the worst case.
Yeah.
And so I decided at the time I need to try the higher value surgery products like lasers or some other
Mhm.
technology, implantables.
Right.
And so I started looking for it, and so me and Dr. David Miller, who is the cornea specialist at Harvard at the time,
Mm-hmm.
we used to meet every 2 weeks for a beer, and we
Mhm.
talk about tons of ideas,
Yes.
and some coming from me. Then he said no clinical use for them.
Right.
Some coming from him. I said, that's not a good idea. We cannot develop it in the price range you want,
Yeah.
or there's no market for it.
Yeah.
We went back and forth, and out of that dialogue, finally an idea came about how to use small aperture optics.
Yeah.
So if you look through pinhole, you have depth of focus is pretty high.
Yeah.
So that's a solution for presbyopia.
Right.
And we noticed that patients who are on pilocarpine, which is a drug for glaucoma,
Yeah.
one of these side effects of pilocarpine is it will constrict your pupil to very small size.
Yeah.
And these patients had no problem reading newspapers.
Right.
And although they were in 60s and 70s.
So they could defer needing reading glasses because they had
Correct.
glaucoma, ironically.
Correct. And they were bragging about it. Oh, I don't
Yes.
need reading glass, I can read paper.
Yeah.
And so cannot read it. And so that idea came in, and so okay, how do we convert this into a product?
Yeah.
And at the time LASIK was coming in, LASIK was very popular,
Yeah.
and we said, what about if we make a small implant or inlay, in
Yeah.
this case, put it under the LASIK flap,
Yeah.
center it properly, and then now
Yeah.
patient is looking through that
Yeah.
implant.
Sure.
So the requirements for that was it has to be very thin,
Yeah.
very porous,
Yeah.
and very black.
Yes. That's quite tricky and
That's
very
quite
well
tricky.
positioned.
Very well positioned.
Yes.
And so we went through tons of materials.
Yeah.
Nothing was that thin, and
Yeah.
nothing was that porous.
Yeah.
And they also has to be biocompatible. And so we were desperate to find the right material to make these implants from,
Yeah.
and which are sterilizable and reasonable cost and all that.
Yeah.
And we were almost on the verge of giving up, and then it's one of those moments. We saw a woman walking into a restaurant with a black hose,
Yeah.
and it said, that nylon fabric is pretty thin and it's black and it's porous. I said, would that work? Is biocompatible?
Yes.
So we explored it, and finally we found a small company in Switzerland who
Yeah.
makes the thinnest of nylons,
Really?
and which is still about 70 microns, and we wanted 5.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And so I flew there, talked to them,
Mm-hmm.
and they said, if you want thinner than 60, we have to manufacture a new loom from beginning.
Right. So it's a woven product.
It's a woven product.
Wow.
We can do that for you, however, you have to pay for all the R&D involved in it. We were just a startup. And
Yes.
so we know we're not going to get there, but we had an idea, which is said, why don't you take your 60 micron and roll it under hot temperature
Yeah.
in steam, and it may become flat and thinner,
Yeah.
and still maintain the porosity.
Yeah.
And they thought, that's a fascinating idea, but still they said, if we make this one, invest our own capital for doing this, how many meters of this material are you going to buy? I said, we looked at each other and said, probably a few meters.
About 6, yeah.
That's good enough for
Yeah.
the whole country
Yeah, that's
someday. And because these were 3.5 millimeters,
Yeah,
out
tiny.
a diameter, tiny. And so we didn't even answer that question. We knew it'll sound so silly.
Yes.
And so we went back and we said, the only way we can get them this happen is if they do it
Yeah.
on their own dollar. And so the CEO of that company was coming
Mm-hmm.
for one of these MDMA meetings.
Mm-hmm.
And in Anaheim, actually, at that time. I was in Boston, the
Yeah.
meeting was in Anaheim. So I came here and I got an appointment with him, and I went there, and I was hoping he would be in 40s and 50s wearing reading glasses.
Yeah.
He was. and I had a piece of paper, I printed all different font sizes.
Yeah.
And a plexiglass, I had that small implant kind of a thing with a pinhole.
Yeah.
And I asked him to take his glasses out and start reading from the highest size print to the lowest print. And he read 1 or 2 lines and said, I can't read anymore.
Yeah.
And I said, okay, now look through this plexiglass pinhole and see how far. And he read all the way down.
Yeah.
And he looked at me and says, this is amazing. And so he said, do you want me to help? There are billions of people who have this problem.
Yes.
And what do you need? And I told him,
Yes.
what do you need to do for us? And roll them and punch them
Mm-hmm.
and treat the edges with a laser or whatever, the heat lasers are there. And he immediately looked at his R&D guy who was next to me and said, give him whatever he wants.
Right.
This is very important.
Yes.
It's going to be very important. And so that's how the company got started, essentially.
Fantastic. What a
Yeah.
great story. Sort of that synthesis thing again.
Yeah.
You realize it's a business deals, it's clinical, it's technical, it's all mixed together.
And how do you appeal to somebody
Yes.
in the right way? And so they made them, and they didn't charge us much at all.
Right.
And they said, you put your R&D cost into the devices.
Yeah.
And so they were still a few dollars a piece.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And that was very, very nice of them.
Sure.
We found out a way to sterilize them, and the company was born. Bill Link funded the company first for $1 million.
Right.
And
Which was Versant Ventures
Versant at that time,
Mhm.
yeah. And we made the device and put it in animals, tested it, and biocompatibility was great.
Yeah.
And then the company was born, AccuFocus.
Right.
Yeah.
It's still alive to this day.
Still
Hasn't become a big market success, but technically it's the most.
Technically is a very successful product, and they'll probably soon will have 100 million in sales or something like that.
Oh, that's certainly
Bausch
getting
and
there.
Lomb bought them,
Okay. Yeah.
and so they're doing well. They have now cornea product,
Mm-hmm.
and they also have an IOL product based on the
okay.
same. And
Really?
the IOL product is doing very well, actually.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Intraocular lens with a small aperture, basically.
Yeah, which we also developed it
Right.
at AcuFocus. And we built it actually in India, so
Yeah.
an IOL company there, and we implanted some in India.
Yeah.
And we knew right away that patients were very happy.
Interesting.
And at my first board meeting, AcuFocus, I presented that.
Yeah.
But the entire board said, no, you need to focus on the cornea first.
Yeah.
You don't have a lot of capital,
Yeah.
and stay focused. And I agreed with them.
Yeah.
But cornea product came into the marketplace much later,
Yeah.
and by the time some of the demand for that was gone,
Sure.
and they also made some. I'm saying they simply because I left the company at some point,
Yeah.
because it was taken over by the bunch of venture capitalists.
Yeah.
They essentially licensed the technology,
Yeah.
and for some equity and royalties and all that.
Sure.
And so they took the market prematurely into Japan
Yeah.
through not proper channels,
Yeah.
and so that had a negative effect on the market.
Sure.
People didn't look at nicely,
Mm-hmm.
and so it didn't do very well in
Right.
the cornea place.
Sure.
And then they dusted off the IOL idea,
Yeah.
which was sitting,
Oh, yes.
and they brought that to the
Oh, and
market.
is that the primary focus right now?
Yeah.
Interesting. I think one of the genius aspects of that product is that it has this aperture, which you would think would be a problem for low light, but actually you can see around it in the
That's
low light
correct.
situation.
That's correct. And
Yeah.
also the porosity of the material
Mhm.
also provides some extra light.
Right.
And so we did a lot of studies on that, and we
Mhm.
found out the amount of light is only about 20 to 28%,
Mm-hmm.
and which is not bad at all. And
Yeah.
because we implant in only one eye,
Right.
and it's still not monovision
Oh, really?
because both eyes see entire
Yeah.
range.
Oh, you only do it in one eye. Didn't know that either.
Yeah.
That's
Is-
interesting.
Yeah, you could do in both eyes, but now the problem you talked about, the light, amount of light
Yeah.
going into the eye, it
Mhm.
gets a little bit worse.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So you created Tomei, which is a technical innovation, market innovation, all of that, and then go and build AcuFocus, that's another technical triumph that turns into a market success.
Right.
And of course the hiccups, ups and downs, and relationships with investors and all of
Yeah.
that sort of thing. Remarkable. So, and I guess after that, these guys have taken it over. Now you start looking around for your next thing because you're not done yet. So tell us a couple of those stories. I think there was a couple things that were kind of medium successes, and then before you got
Right.
into your current
One
company.
was 3D vision systems.
Right.
So this idea was basically all surgery in ophthalmology is done under surgical microscopes,
Yeah.
which are basically optical instruments.
Yeah.
And what you see is what you get, and is coaxial viewing.
Yeah.
And we felt very strongly that you could digitize the image
Mm-hmm.
and present the same in 3D, that image, a
Yeah.
very larger image,
Mm-hmm.
and you can exaggerate the separation
Yeah.
rather than what we have between our two eyes,
Mm-hmm.
and that gives you much better depth perception,
Sure.
which is very important in the retinal
Yeah.
surgery.
Sure.
And then we said, if you layer over that excellent images, high resolution
Mhm,
images,
yeah.
and high
Mhm.
rep rate, frame rate images, some sort of a software
Yeah.
to analyze the image and provide some guidance for the surgeon.
Yeah.
And you can do metrology, things
Yeah,
like
sure.
that,
Mhm.
and in real time, and that will give surgeons quite a bit. They can
Mhm.
see overlays, that and this,
Right.
cut along the dotted light, kind of the concept. And so that was a larger concept, and we saw that in that the hardware becomes incidental eventually. Most of the value is going to be in the software, which analyzes the
Yeah,
images
sure.
and provides some feedback to the
Mhm.
surgeon.
Yeah.
And the goal was to make an average surgeon much better surgeon.
Right.
That's the kind of a goal.
Yeah.
And so we started on the right foot. We we knew we had to build a 3D camera,
Mm-hmm.
and so we built one,
Mm-hmm.
and it was working okay. It was not high resolution. It was some 800 lines or something like that
Yeah.
at the time, VGA kind of a resolution.
Yes.
And but it provided absolutely stunning images in 3D, and we used just a PC for processing it, and it was a little bit of a souped up PC, and we wrote the software and all early software, capturing, presenting, and all that.
Yeah.
And we started showing that to a lot of venture capitalists, and none of them really excited because they said, "Do you really need this?" Well, you know,
Right.
I said, "Yeah, do you really need a digital camera?"
Right.
But everybody has gone to digital cameras
Yeah, sure.
because what it provides in software is a lot more amazing
Yes.
compared to a printed image
Mm-hmm.
and from an analog camera. And most of the venture guys didn't get it. So, and then we realized at one point that someday most of this hardware would be available on the shelf.
Right.
And then we can synthesize the hardware from somebody else, maybe Sony's and other people,
Yeah.
and then just create an operating system to run it.
Mm-hmm.
And that would be a right business model.
Right.
And so we also realized we were way ahead of our time.
It was the right idea at the wrong time.
Exactly wrong time.
Mm-hmm.
So we gave up some of our patents to a company in Santa Barbara,
Yeah.
and they said, "Can we go ahead with this one?" Because we were working in collaboration. So go ahead, you know, we're not going to do anything with it. And we didn't invest a lot of money in this one at the time. And so they took it over, and they found funding from foundations, some very wealthy people in Santa Barbara.
Yes.
And they took it forward, and they finally sold that company to Alcon for $250 million.
There you go. Hope you got some reward from that.
Yeah, no, we didn't get any reward for that, other than
The satisfaction of it.
yeah, satisfaction of it. And
Yeah.
and so it's a now very successful product in Alcon line. And recently, as I said, we are also going to come out with one.
That's fantastic. So maybe not quite so fantastic in the okay. So 3D vision or 3D vision systems was a success in terms of validating. You found an important niche and you developed a product for it and became a big success, but you didn't personally benefit much from it. So that's
No.
kind of part of the entrepreneurial thing. Hopefully that there's some reward,
That's
not
right.
just a reward of the validation variety.
Yeah, satisfaction is your idea lives on for longer than you do.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I know then you had a couple of smaller ventures that you were kind of tinkering with, and maybe you want to briefly touch on them before we get to the big one.
Yeah, one was a pharmaceutical company. That's a venture started by a friend of mine. My role there was to raise money and run the company
Yeah.
and take a product from early stages
Yeah.
to phase 3 trials,
Yeah.
international trials. We did that, and the product almost met the endpoints
Yeah.
in the FDA study, and venture cap. It was 2008 when the study failed slightly, and venture capitalists didn't want to go forward. And
Sure.
so
It was
that
a bad
company-
time. Yeah.
It's a bad time. They were very scared
Yeah.
time for everybody. So that company has to be basically went into insolvency.
Yeah.
And it was okay. Nobody got hurt in that one. Everybody got funded and all that.
Yeah.
All the creditors were made good, and it was okay overall.
Yeah.
And but that's one thing I learned in the FDA trials. How do you pick endpoints?
Yes.
How carefully? How do you pick your statistics carefully? And
Yeah.
and how do you pick metrology for measuring whatever your endpoints are?
Yeah.
They're all critical things. And So it's a good learning. And it was a short stint anyway. And so from there, I decided I need to start something on my own, and again, not work with a friend on this one. And the LensGen idea came in,
Right.
and
You're going back to presbyopia again.
looking back to the presbyopia, because even at the time I felt IOL is a better solution than a cornea, because a cornea is becoming, it's an unfriendly place to put a foreign object.
Yeah.
Because if it is not in the right place within the corneal stroma, the reaction is pretty violent. And so it's like a corneal melt completely.
Right.
And so it's a very severe consequence. Whereas IOLs are implanted in a basically a vascular bag, so to speak, capsule, and so you cannot do really a lot of damage.
Right.
You can, but you can do not a lot of damage. So I knew that's a better place, and also cataract surgery is more familiar, more widely accepted, and so he said it has to be an IOL. And if you looked at all the IOLs at that time, they were either multifocal, and which had a very poor optical performance.
They were selling them pretty heavily at the time.
They were.
These are lenses that look at multiple distance at the same time.
Right.
Sort of mush everything together. You lose contrast.
Right.
And
anytime you're using a third of the light or a quarter of the light, so contrast goes down, and these multiple images create a cognitive dissonance.
Yes.
And so people see glare, halos, and starbursts. The night vision is a nightmare.
Yes.
And so we realize these are products which are involve strong compromises, trade-offs for the patients, but nevertheless they were going for it simply because their desire for getting rid of the glasses or contact lenses is far higher than the things you have to put up with.
Yeah.
And so that became clear, and so we said, why not we think about making a product which is similar to the way a young person's eye works. How does it accommodate? And it accommodates by changing shape. The natural human lens, crystalline lens, is almost jelly-like.
Yeah.
And a very low modulus material. And so it changes shape easily with a very small amount of force. And the force is coming from the capsule. And so we said we need to create something similar to the nature. So that involves in a fluid lens. And not much was known about fluid lenses in terms of the materials. And then on top of that, we had to create a system which works with a very, very low force. Because these forces in the eye are so tiny, and nobody knew what those forces were. Everybody knew they were tiny, but didn't know what it is.
Yes.
So we didn't even know what we were designing for.
Right.
And so we asked a lot of researchers, do you know what the forces could be? And nobody really had an idea, and anything published in the literature was varied from 1 to 10.
Right.
So do we design for one, the worst case, which is the hardest thing to design for, because you need material which is really, really low modulus, or do you design for 10 and hope it works?
Right.
And so we designed for something like 2.5, 3.
Right.
And that turned out, it was less than 1,
Really?
the real number.
Very, very small. That's
Very
remarkable.
Yeah,
That,
and then we had to come up with a methodology of measuring that,
Yeah.
and because there was none.
Right.
And once we were able to measure it with some degree of confidence, then the design task became a little bit easier. And so we had the product tested fully in animals and all that, ready for implantation in about 3 years.
Amazing. And I don't know if the audience understands that presbyopia affects everybody. So your market is billions
That's
people.
right.
Billions of people, and not billions of dollars. And if billions of people spend thousands each, that's like
a huge
that's
market, yeah.
gigantic market. So this is, some people consider this to be the holy grail of ophthalmology. Is sort of
Absolutely, because they've been trying since mid 80s
right.
to come up with a fluid lens or fill the capsule with the fluid. All kinds of ideas were flowing around. A lot of capital was invested in it at every level, and corporate levels, and also venture capital, and most of them were failures. And one company actually had a product approved, the Ionics product, which works not on changing the shape of the lens, but works on the shape and moving the lens back and forth on a hinge. And it didn't work very well at all, and it was sometimes moving back, actually.
I think that, wasn't there a giant scandal in essence that
It
it was a
was.
major acquisition in the field?
That's right.
And it turns out that it's actually very hard to measure whether it's working.
That's
and
right.
so a lot of people were deluding themselves that it was working when it wasn't.
That's right. But investors in the company made okay because Bausch & Lomb bought that product company for $500 million.
Yes.
So they did okay.
Yeah.
But surgeons were disappointed, patients were even more disappointed,
Yeah.
and everybody was writing to FDA, why did you approve this product? It doesn't work.
Sure.
And
So you thought, that's great. Let's go back into a field that's a blackened stubble of
Right.
that everybody's scared of.
Right, and so a lot of investment dollars have gone into that, wasted, and so there was no investor enthusiasm, no enthusiasm from the strategics,
Yeah.
and even some of the doctors I talked to, they said, oh yeah, we heard that there are accommodators, but we don't believe in them anymore.
All right.
Surgeons didn't believe, and it was pretty tough situation for a young startup.
Yeah.
And so we realized that nobody's going to talk to us or invest in us until we have some proof of principle in a human eye.
Yeah, sure.
And so the challenge for the company ended up as how efficiently we can and how fast we can get to that point where we have evidence from humans.
Right.
And so it's an entirely different strategy on how to run the company. You take some big risks in that one, and you don't have 4 ways of testing something. You pick the most likely one and go with it.
Yes.
And most of the time it's the right one.
Yes.
And that's where the experience helps, the collective experience of the team.
Yeah.
And so we, as a team, we did well, and we kept on hitting the milestones. And in 3.5 years, we had a human data, and which was working very well. And some of our goals on the incision size and all that were also there.
Yes.
And so we were very pleased, and that's when we started raising serious money, not angel money. And at the time, Hoya Corporation from Japan came in. They internally spent $30-40 million, and it didn't achieve the goal. So they knew a little bit about it, the technology, what is involved, what's the hard part, what's the easy part, and then they knew sort of instinctively that this technology, what we created, is the better one.
Yeah.
And so they put in $25 million as Series A. And that really gave a company start and to do more studies overseas, file with the FDA, the IDE, to all the testing that has to be done for that. And so we also there, we knew with the FDA you have to see them often.
Now you're still in the middle of this venture.
Yes.
And you now have an approved clinical trial that will start in September, like coming up next month. This month,
right.
I guess.
That's right.
And so that's and you're funding it as you're going along, and it's a tough market to raise capital in. So here you are, right in the middle
But
of the usual entrepreneurial turmoil.
and yeah, usual entrepreneurial rolling the dice kind of a thing. We're doing it,
Yeah.
and so we feel very good about this technology because in terms of challenges, technical challenges,
Yeah.
both in design, both in clinic,
Yeah.
and also manufacturing challenges
Sure.
for this product, we have mostly addressed well
Sure.
so far.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't mean we won't have some more challenges in the clinic. That's
Yeah.
the nature of the beast.
Yeah.
And but we have a lot of confidence based on our overseas data.
Mm-hmm. This one feels amazing to me. Like
Yeah.
this is going to be $1 billion exit at some point to a large.
It should
strategic.
be.
Yeah.
It really should be because this is the only product now will come to the marketplace 2-3 years ahead of anybody else who is working on this area.
Yeah.
And if it does well in the clinical trial, it should do extremely well in the marketplace as
Yeah.
well. And it meets all the requirements of the market, what
Sure.
surgeons want, what patients want, and what industry in general wants. So it's the right product.
Sure.
And we had some supplier challenges, and it took us a while to resolve them. When you have challenges from the materials, stability or something, it's tough.
Yeah.
But we resolved it, and we are moving forward. And yeah, that's the way it goes.
Remarkable. So this is your most ambitious venture yet. You just turned 80 years old, and it's the most incredible story. You're just so full of vitality and energy. You act like you're 60 or 55.
I think if you're passionate about a mission or whatever it is,
Yeah.
and that keeps you young.
Yes.
It's not other way around.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Fantastic.
If you didn't have it, you probably age much faster.
So before we sort of go to wrap up, I just wanted to talk to you, learn a little bit from you about your clinical strategy and your regulatory strategy for something as tricky as this with the difficult history of the space.
Yeah, on the regulatory strategy, it's very interesting because of the failure of the previous device that FDA approved. FDA kind of had an egg on their face when that happened, with all the feedback they got. And so FDA very quickly assembled a team of experts. And they said, for the next product we will approve as an accommodative lens, what should be the standards? And so these people in vacuum, none of them had experience with any accommodative lens. They drew a bunch of standards and said, you have to be able to objectively measure accommodation in the eye.
But this is one of the problems of the previous two products, actually. Neither of them was measuring objective accommodation.
That's right.
It was sort of self-reported pencil push-ups, as they call them.
That's correct. Yeah. Exactly right. But they thought any of the existing refraction equipment will measure it.
Yeah.
And they didn't check it because there was no device to check it.
Yeah.
And so it was, that's why I said, it's sort of a standard in vacuum. And our wishful thinking that any instrument would be able to measure it. And they based it on measuring on young patients. And there, of course, the instrument can measure it. Simple optics and all that. And so when we started testing it, we found out it's very hard to make that measurement on people who are presbyopes with our lens in it. And they cannot focus, they cannot fixate, all kinds of problems. And so we decided that we don't have to go for the accommodative label. You don't have to go for the same label that your marketing label is going to be.
Yeah.
You can go for a lesser label, which says simply mitigates the presbyopia.
Right.
And then once you get an approval, we have two choices. We can market it, and the people will buy. They know what it does, and it's mitigating presbyopia. Ultimately, whether you measure objectively, subjectively, doesn't make any. So it is not limited by performance, but
Right.
it's limited by
You
label.
don't have to make a particular claim of how many diopters, because the
Correct.
market doesn't really
That's
respond to that so much anyways.
Yeah, and so we went for subjective endpoints, and somewhere along the line, all the conversation with the FDA, they said, "Oh yeah, in your label you can put shape changing."
Oh, okay. So they found a sort of a
Yeah.
stronger claim that you could make.
That's right.
Yeah.
And they suggested that.
Right.
So it's great for us, you know, because the whole world thinks shape changing means accommodative.
Right.
And so we don't have an accommodative label, we have a lesser label, but that's a perfect regulatory strategy.
Right.
So in a regulatory strategy, what you learn is it's not what your marketing claims. You want to get all those labels approved by FDA.
Yeah.
You want the lowest common denominator of that
Right.
one.
Sure. Yes.
Because once the product is in the marketplace, it's used. FDA doesn't control it.
Right. Sure.
And so
They control what you can say about it, but they don't control how people
that's
use
right.
it.
Exactly right. So as long as we don't claim it, that's fine.
Yeah.
And so that was a very, very good idea. And so that's what we are going for right now.
Sure.
And so that's on the regulatory side. On the clinical side, the challenge is going to pick the best sites, best surgeons, and making sure that each one of those sites has a separate clinical research division.
Right. So not just going to find a hospital.
Yeah, you don't want to go where surgeons have a regular flow of their patients, and then you have their research patients.
Right.
If you mix them together
Yeah.
with the same staff, then it's a disaster.
Right. That's a very good insight that a lot of people make that mistake.
Yeah, a lot of people make that mistake. So first thing we ask is, do you have a study coordinator dedicated? Do you have a staff? And do you have a separate room for doing assessments of the patients?
Right.
And do you have instrumentation you need? If you don't have, we'll supply it. But then you need to commit a technician to learn how to use it.
Right. Sure.
So those are the kind of things become important up front in the clinical study strategy. But the most important knowledge in any clinical study is, if you want to optimize the cost of the study, you have to optimize the time.
Right.
And where the time becomes really critical is enrollments.
Right.
Every site they say, yeah, we can enroll 30 patients in a month.
Right.
But in reality, it takes 9 months.
Right. Yes.
And for whatever reasons.
Yeah.
And so how you create a relationship with the site personnel and make those enrollments faster is the key.
So it's not enough just to sign a contract and then let them get on with their thing. You've got to be very involved.
No, you have to be there
Yeah.
on the side, incentivizing the site personnel,
Yeah.
creating friendships with them,
Sure, yeah.
relationships with them. This is such a key part of it.
Yeah.
Because if you imagine, if your enrollments are the last enrollment delayed by 3 months, and because some site is not enrolling as fast as they could,
Yeah. Sure.
they're kind of behind. That means you have to follow every patient for 1 year. So 3 months now plus that 1 year,
Yeah.
you can't submit anything.
Right.
So enrollment becomes really the key point of
Right. And meanwhile,
managing
you're paying
costs.
all your staff all that time as well, right?
That's
So
right.
It's just more capital, more dilution for all the
Right.
investors.
right, and more also, that much late
Yes.
market entry,
Mm-hmm.
and so that's really the key. And how you maintain those relationships with the site, motivate them, incentivize them, and
Sure.
to enroll patients as fast as they can.
Mm-hmm.
And then the same way they also do very diligently all the documentation.
Sure.
And with the surgeons, enforcing a protocol on them.
Right.
Because they say, oh, we know how to do cataract surgery. No, but you have to do it this way.
Right. This is pure gold. I mean, this is all hard-won experience. I don't often get to interview an 80-year-old who's been doing this ever since he was 25 years old and learning lessons every year. So it's So wonderful. I think we're kind of at more or less about as long as we want to go here, but I'm curious whether you have any sort of words of wisdom that you want to share with other entrepreneurs who don't have 60 years of experience.
I think number one, I always say is bumps in the road, hills in the road, mountains in the road is par for the course.
Yes.
And if you are deterred by any one of them, you're not going to be a good entrepreneur.
Right.
So you fall down often, and you just get up, dust off, and point your nose to the same direction you were before and keep going.
Right.
And that's the most important. Perseverance is probably the most important attribute to a entrepreneur. That's number one. And number two, I'll say, is the team. And you must assemble a really, really good team with expertise in all the areas that you need.
Right.
And I give you an example. You know, we had in our team a guy who used to sell IOLs as a courier for a long time. And he was in operating room with surgeons, watching a lot of cataract surgeons, their comments, what they want, what they don't like. And we had that person as a design team. And so he would bring that discipline to the R&D team. R&D team was, okay, this problem is solved. I really don't care that much about a user interface. I mean, that's typical engineer attitude.
Yes.
We solved the big problem now. You want me to worry about other minor things? And so to bring that kind of a thinking where, hey, we have to make exactly what the surgeon wants.
Yeah.
And that means, although this beautiful thing works fine, but it's not the way the surgeon looks at it or feels about it, so you have to change it.
Yes.
And so we went through a lot of design aspects through that kind of a thinking. And because we said for the first time, I said, this should be exactly like a standard cataract surgery as far as surgeon is concerned.
Yes.
No new skill. And so adhering to that principle was very important, and that, I think, earned us a lot of brownie points with a lot of KOLs. And so having that kind of a team where all expertise, all kinds of expertise is all together is very important, I think.
Right.
And the transparency within the team, transparency within the communications within the company is another important. And I think, as somebody said, you know, culture is more important than capital.
Right.
And so I think Peter Drucker said that.
Yes, I've heard a few versions of that. Yes. Oh, wonderful. Well, thank you, Ram. There are 100 lessons tied into all these things that you said. I hope that people that listen to this go find those lessons and insights. And thank you for sharing your wisdom. I hope you inspire a lot of people. It's been a total pleasure to interview you today. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I enjoyed it too. And as I said, someday I'm going to interview you.
Perfect. Thank you.